So for today, I'm gonna discuss the Bureau of the Quarantine under the Department of the Health. Under the Part 2, which is the requirements of the vessels upon the entry of the foreign ports. Under the Part 3, which is the requirements of the domestic vessels. And under the Part 4, which is the requirements of vessels while in port. So, the implementing of rules and regulations of the Quarantine Act of the 2004, the Republic Act 9271, which has been enacted by the 12th Congress of the Republic of the Philippines, serve as the revised and updated version of the IRR. So this includes the implementation of the international health regulations of the World Health Organization, in which the country is bound to observe and implement as a member state of the said organization. So the Administrative Order number of 2005, this is the revised quarantine rules and regulation of 2004. So what is the purpose of this revised rules and regulation of quarantine? So these rules and regulation are promulgated to protect and to promote the health of the people by ensuring maximum security against the introduction or the spread of disease that was subject to international health regulation. Let's proceed from the part 2, which entitled the requirements of vessels, which is upon entry from the foreign ports. So section 7, the vessels to be inspected. All the vessels that coming from the foreign ports are subject to quarantine inspection upon entry in any port of the Philippines. Without any exception, these vessels cleared in one point in the Philippines are deemed clear for all the ports in the country except in any cases of the any vessels with an infectious disease. So section 8, the requirements for the vessel to be inspected, which said that any vessels which coming from the foreign ports subject to quarantine inspection shall be considered in quarantine until given a pratik. So what kind of pratik or clearance issued incoming to the incoming vessels? It should be the first, the free pratik. The free pratik is issued to a vessel which has complied with the quarantine rules and regulation as provided in the IRR. And the second is the provision pratik. This provision pratik can be issued to vessels which have the following condition if the vessel has isolation of subject or actual case. We have also the controlled free pratik, which is called the direct berthing privilege. This is a pratik which granted to vessels with a request for a direct berthing privilege submitted within the 48 hours, which is prior to its estimated time of arrival. Also have the radiopatic. What is a radiopatic? It should be granted to military vessels of the Republic of the Philippines and foreign countries. There is no sick person on board. There has no been death or illness, and the certificate should be the prevailing exemption valid. So the fifth under the section 11 is the controlled radiopatic. This is granted to cruise vessels under the following conditions. First, there should be a ship surgeon on the board. Under the cruise vessels, the request for controlled radio shall be submitted to the Bureau within the 48 hours. So the section 11, which is the immunization certificate requirement. Under the immunization certificate requirement, um, those travelers which are arriving from the yellow fever, they are called as the infected areas, are required to present valid international certificate of vaccinations against yellow fever if arriving within 6 days from that area. So under the part 2, which is the section 13, entitled the boarding vessels from the foreign ports placed under the quarantine. In case of notification of the presence of subject cases infectious disease, subject to the regulations emerging disease and or public health emergencies of international concern and or death on board, there should be no person is allowed to embark except from the quarantine medical officer Disembarkation of the passenger and crew is not allowed until such time that the vessel has been granted quarantine clearance. The suspect cases shall be medically evaluated, and the remaining passengers and crew of vessels, if the need arises, should be medically evaluated. So under the section 14, the requirements of vessels before the departure, that they said that there should be no vessel be allowed to depart from any seaport of the Philippines to foreign destination without securing an outgoing quarantine clearance from the director of the quarantine or his duly authorized representative. The embarkation of the travelers for internal voyage, which is the director of the quarantine, when he considered it necessary, may be the medical examination of the traveler. The personnel assigned for inspection, which the quarantine inspection of vessels shall be conducted by the quarantine medical officer and our duly accredited assistant, which is designated by the director of the quarantine. So the time of vessels quarantine inspection. The inspection of the vessels as required by this regulation shall be made between 800 to 1200 hours and 1300 to 1700 hours from Monday to Friday. So any inspection performed outside these hours and during Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays shall be compensated. So let's proceed to the part 3, which is entitled The Requirements of Domestic Vessels. So section 18, this is the vessels to be inspected. They said that all the domestic vessels plying domestic ports with the presence of infectious disease subject to the regulation um, concern and death on board subject to quarantine inspection and clearance, and they shall be in all ports where there are no quarantine officials. Clearance of the vessel will be coordinated with the local health authorities. Under section 19, the requirements for the vessels to be inspected. The domestic vessel subject to inspection shall be considered in quarantine until properly cleared. During the inclement weather, the condition of proper shelter or lee should be afforded to the quarantine boarding officer before the boarding formality can be conducted. In case of extreme weather condition, the boarding formality could be held in abeyance until such condition would be favorable. Under the section 20, the requirements from the master of the vessels to be inspected. The master of the vessel shall provide quarantine medical officers the clinical record, the derating certificate, the passenger and crew list, the voyage or the port of call, and other documents deemed necessary by the quarantine medical. They shall, as soon be practicable, notify the Bureau of the Quarantine at the next port. Under the Section 21, which is the immunization requirements, the director of the quarantine may be time to time prescribe or require immunization from certain disease if his discretion, such as requirements, are essential or account of varying public conditions. And under the Section 22, the extent and method of quarantine inspection. During the inspection of the vessels, the quarantine medical officer shall check the following conditions. The first, the state of health. Second, the existence of infectious disease subject to the regulations. The sanitary conditions, the validity of the rating certificate, and the type of tonnage of the cargo. Under the Section 23, the personnel assigned for inspection of inter-island vessels. The quarantine inspection of vessels shall be conducted by the quarantine medical officer and is duly accredited or assistants designated by the director of quarantine. In port, where there are no quarantine medical officer, a duly trained physician will be designated under the Secretary of Health as acting or alternate quarantine medical officer upon recommendation of the director of the quarantine. Under the Section 24, the boarding of domestic vessels that was placed under the quarantine. In case of the notification of the presence of suspected cases or of infectious disease which is subject to the regulation, they should consider that no person is allowed to embark except the quarantine medical officer. Hence, the disembarkation of the passenger and crew is not allowed until such time that the vessel has been granted a quarantine clearance. And in case when the vessel is exposed to RBC, the radiological, the biological, and the chemical terrorism, the tailored action on such incidents should be followed in the accordance to the interim guidance of the preparedness and response. Let's proceed to the part 4, the requirements of the vessels while in port. So what are the requirements of the vessels while they are in port? It should be the first, the rot guards and mooring connection lines. If the vessel docks alongside the piers or mooring line shall be provided with the prescribed rot guards not less than 1 meter in diameter and so fixed as to be always at the right angle in the line which is attached. The cargo net or the gangway plank and rump. All the cargo nets should be hauled up when not in use. The gangway or the rump shall be lifted up when not in operation and well lighted throughout the night to prevent the access of rodents. The distance of the vessels on the dock. All the vessels should be fanned off at least 1.5 meters from the dock. The mooring of the vessels to another vessels which is the moored to a dock. A vessel which shall tie alongside another vessel moored to a dock shall be institute all the necessary measure to prevent the access of the rots from one to vessels to another. Under the section 26, the disposal of garbage. No vessel shall be allowed to dump garbage or waste overboard while they are in harbor. The garbage should be collected in prescribed containers for disposal, and when the vessel is in the port, the arrangement should be made for the regular removal of the garbage by a disposal service in accordance with the environment and health provision on ways of disposal to ensure that it is properly collected and treated and disposed in accordance with the existence of standard and laws. The ROT inspection of the vessels, which is under the section 27. This is the following vessels shall be subject to ROT inspection while in harbor. The vessel without derating or derating exemption certificate, the vessel with expired drafting, and the vessel with valid derating. Any inspection of the ROT informations shall be under the supervision of the quarantine medical officer and shall be findings shall be recorded in the derating inspection. The fumigation under this section 28, this is the following subject to fumigation while in harbor. First, any vessel with human or rodent plague on board. Second, any vessel moderately or heavily infested with rats, other pets, and vermins. Third, if the cargoes in a vessel from a plague-infected port, which are vulnerable to harbor rats and fleas. However, if the cargo is covered by a valid certificate of fumigation from the port of loading, the fumigation may be waived subject to the verification of the authenticity of the certification, unless if the inter-island vessels order periodic annual fumigation.